Welcome to Occult Archives.
Yeah.
You know, where we kind of like uncover the mysteries and myths and legends behind history's most...
Feared. Yeah.
Yeah. History's most feared books.
The most talked about and feared.
Right.
Yeah.
Forget those dry summaries, folks. We are going deep, plunging straight into texts rumored to hold secrets too dangerous to even read.
Backstage pass to the forbidden library.
Backstage pass, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
Exactly. We're not just going to, like, recount what these books say, but we're going to, like, understand why people are so fascinated by them, like their historical context, the allure.
Right. All that stuff.
Yeah.
Today, you've brought us a real head-scratcher.
Yeah.
Alchemy Rediscovered and Restored. Archibald Cockren.
Archibald Cockren, yeah.
You flagged this one. You're intrigued by the classic alchemical quest, right?
Of course, yeah.
Transmuting metals into gold.
Yeah.
Maybe even finding the elixir of life.
The big one, right.
Our mission, if you choose to accept it,
is to navigate Cochran's exploration of this legendary art and extract the most...
compelling.
Yeah, compelling insights for our listeners.
Yeah.
No pressure.
No pressure. And though Cochran's work really is remarkable because it's like a historical journey through alchemical thought. He's referencing texts, figures spanning like thousands of years.
Oh.
We're talking ancient wisdom attributed to Hermes Trismegistus.
Okay.
All the way to people, individuals like Nicholas Flamel, you know, who seem ripped from the pages of history.
Yeah.
The Comte de Saint-Germain.
Right. The perpetually mysterious.
The perpetually mysterious.
Yeah.
A very good way of putting it.
Let's start at the source then.
Yeah.
Cochran starts with some seriously old school references. Hermes Trismegistus.
Yeah.
The Smaragdine table.
Right.
This is like foundation of a secret tradition, right?
Yeah. I think what's so captivating is the almost mythical status of both of them. So Hermes Trismegistus, right? He's revered as this central figure in what we call Hermeticism.
Yeah.
Which is this philosophical, spiritual tradition that really heavily influenced alchemy.
Okay.
And then the Smaragdine table, or the Tabula Smaragdina, as it's also known, is attributed to him. This short but incredibly dense text that supposedly holds like the fundamental principles of alchemy.
Like a decoder ring.
Like a decoder ring, a Rosetta Stone.
Yeah. For alchemists, what's the story behind its
discovery? So there are various accounts. I mean, each adds to this kind of mystique.
Right.
One popular legend claims Alexander the Great discovered it.
Okay.
Inscribed on an emerald slab. Right?
Okay.
In Hermes' tomb.
Oh, wow.
Right. You know, there's also an account from an Arabic work. It's thought to be from like the 9th century.
Okay.
And that suggests that it was actually found clutched in Hermes' hands.
Really?
Within a dark cave. Who knows? Right.
Right.
But regardless of the exact origin story, it's undeniably like one of the oldest and most influential alchemical fragments. Yeah. And what are some of those key principles it lays out? What's the core message like for the alchemist?
At its heart, I would say the Smaragdine table teaches the fundamental unity of all matter. This idea that everything we perceive is a manifestation of a single underlying source, often called the ether.
Oh, okay.
You know, which actually resonates with modern science in some ways.
Right.
You know, this idea of interconnection of the universe.
Right.
It emphasizes that connection with that famous axiom, as above, so below, suggesting a profound correspondence between the macroscopic world, the big, and the microscopic realm, the small.
Okay.
And for alchemists, this wasn't just a poetic phrase. This was a fundamental principle that suggests that understanding the microcosm of matter could unlock the secrets of the macrocosm.
Right.
You know, even today, kind of a holistic viewpoint.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So this ancient text, it really sets the stage for like the entire alchemical worldview. But, I mean, you can't help but wonder how this knowledge was preserved.
Yeah.
I mean, Cochran mentions this significant loss of early texts.
Yeah, he highlights this pivotal event in the 3rd century A.D.
Okay.
So the Roman Emperor Diocletian
Right.
allegedly destroyed a lot of Egyptian books on alchemy, other occult sciences in 296 A.D. So a lot of early alchemical progress, right?
Yes.
We don't have the evidence.
Lost. If this account holds true,
right.
It's a huge blow.
It's like trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Exactly.
So who are some of the key figures that kind of helped keep these ideas alive?
So Cochran points to several important individuals in the centuries that followed. We have Zosimus of Panopolis.
Okay.
He was around in the 4th century, who wrote quite extensively on the divine art of making gold and silver.
Okay.
Then we have Morianus. He was a hermit.
Okay.
And he sought out this adept named Adfar in Alexandria.
Okay.
And he became his devoted disciple.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a work attributed to Morianus.
Mm-hmm. Presented as like a dialogue, a conversation with King Khaled, and thankfully that still exists, offering valuable insights into early alchemical beliefs and practices.
So these are like the whispers of a lost tradition.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we have Geber.
Geber.
A name I think a lot of people might actually recognize.
Right.
Wasn't he kind of a...
Central figure?
Central figure, yeah.
Geber, whose actual name was Abu Musa Jafar al-Sofi, lived around 750 AD.
Okay.
He's revered by a lot of alchemists as one of the most significant adepts after Hermes.
Really?
Right. So there were claims that he authored 500 treatises, but really only 3 primary works, we think, have actually survived.
Okay.
The Sum of the Perfect Magistery, the Investigation of Perfection, and then the Testament.
Okay.
But importantly, he's credited with the first documented mentions of substances like corrosive sublimate, red oxide of mercury, and nitrate of silver. So, while the Philosopher's Stone is the ultimate goal,
people like Geber were laying some practical groundwork.
Right. So he's getting into the nitty-gritty of, like, specific chemical substances.
Absolutely, yeah.
But Cockren also mentions his writing style, it was pretty...
impenetrable.
Yeah, impenetrable.
Right.
Very much so.
I mean, is this where we get the term gibberish?
That's precisely the connection that Cockren makes.
Really?
Yeah, Geber's writing was so veiled and mysterious that it's believed that his name is the origin of that word.
Wow.
But Cockren is also quick to point out that, those who truly understood Geber, his fellow adepts, maintained that he did convey profound truth with great precision. It was just deliberately disguised.
Right, sort of like a secret code within the text itself.
Exactly, yeah, to keep the knowledge out of
wrong hands.
The wrong hands, exactly.
Following Geber, we've got a few other Arabian alchemists to mention.
He briefly mentions, Rhasis, Al-Farabi, Avicenna, each contributing to, like, the ongoing intellectual development of alchemical ideas within the Arabian world.
Okay, so strong roots in Egypt, flourishes in the Arabian world. What about his journey into Europe?
Yeah,
Cockren mentions Spain, the Crusades.
Yes, Spain and the Crusades were really pivotal. So the transmission of alchemy to Europe, it really gained momentum like around the time of the First Crusade, with Spain becoming a crucial point of entry.
Right.
And that's largely due to the influence of Moorish scholars who had preserved and expanded upon those earlier alchemical texts.
Okay, so that's how that bridge was made.
Right. And, the 12th century brings us this figure, Artifius.
Okay.
And he penned this work, The Art of Prolonging Human Life.
Okay.
And he makes this rather extraordinary claim of having lived for 1,000 years thanks to an admirable quintessence.
1,000 years. That's a bold statement.
Yeah.
So what was his secret, this admirable quintessence?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Right.
He doesn't fully disclose the process.
Right.
But he hints at this deep understanding of Hermetic arts.
Okay.
But what's interesting is he asserts that the ultimate secret can only be revealed by either divine intervention or a master alchemist. But he does suggest that diligent study of his book, coupled with experience and an open mind, might lead to its discovery.
So a tantalizing clue, but not a recipe we can try at home.
Exactly.
Right. The 13th century. It seems like it's a busy time for Cockren's account.
Yeah.
We've got a king, we got poets.
Yeah.
We got someone who met a pretty grim end thanks to the Inquisition.
It was a time of, like, growing fascination with alchemy in Europe.
Right.
And with that, you get a diverse cast of characters. So you have Alfonso X, King of Castile.
Okay.
He's credited with a work known as Tesoro.
Okay.
We have these literary figures, William Dolores and Jean de Meung, and they wove alchemical themes into their renowned work, the Roman de la Rose, and other writings, right? Like the Remonstrance of Nature to the Wandering Alchemist.
Okay.
And then there's the more tragic story of Peter d'Apona, who wrote about magic, right?
Right.
And he was accused by the Inquisition of consorting with spirits.
Right.
And ultimately, his life ended on the rack.
A stark reminder that these pursuits came with risks.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Arnold de Villeneuve, he didn't fare so well with the Inquisition either.
No, he didn't. Even though he managed to, like, escape their grasp.
Right.
He was a physician.
Right.
Theologian and alchemist. And his writings, you can find them preserved in collections like the Theatrum Chemicum.
Okay.
But they were condemned as heretical by the Inquisition in Tarragona.
It's tricky business, this alchemy.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. Navigating the intellectual, religious landscape of the time.
Yep.
What about some more mainstream figures like Albertus Magnus and his famous student Aquinas?
Yeah.
Did they dabble in transmutation as well?
So Cockren notes that Albertus Magnus, who was a highly respected philosopher and renounced worldly privileges for, a life of study,
Right.
and his sainted pupil Thomas Aquinas,
Right.
were both reportedly successful in achieving transmutation.
Really?
Aquinas even alludes to these successes in his Thesaurus Alchemy, which he actually wrote for his friend Abbot Reginald.
So even within, established intellectual and religious circles,
Yeah.
alchemy had a certain appeal.
It did. It did. It definitely piqued some curiosity.
Right, right. And then there's this almost larger-than-life figure, Raymond Lully.
Yeah.
And Cockren paints him as someone surrounded by conflicting accounts. What's the gist?
So with Lully, it's a complex case, right?
Right.
We have the sheer volume of writings attributed to him. Some 486 treatises on a vast array of subjects, really.
Right.
And that strongly suggests that Raymond Lully might have been a pseudonym employed by multiple adepts over time, right?
Right.
The details of his life are also varied, ranging from a kind of dissolute youth who underwent a profound religious conversion to a later engagement with alchemy. And then you have the tale of him working in the Tower of London for Edward II.
Oh, wow.
Transmuting metals to finance the Crusades.
That's a great story.
And then imprisonment and subsequent escape. All that
right.
really adds to the mystique. And the claims that he lived to be 150 and retained this youthful vigor.
Right.
It's really likely that Raymond Lully represents more of a collective, a body of alchemical knowledge, than an individual.
Raymond Lully, more like a brand name for alchemical wisdom
Exactly, a lineage.
than a specific guy. It sounds like the pursuit of alchemy is gaining traction in Europe, but not without its pitfalls. Yeah. Cockren mentions it's fallen to disrepute.
Yeah, as the allure of transmutation kind of intensified, so did the proliferation of charlatans.
Of course.
Right.
Right.
They were eager to exploit the greed and credulity of others. Promises of turning lead into gold attracted wealthy merchants.
Right.
Individuals seeking quick fortunes.
Yeah.
Often resulting in really significant financial losses. And this widespread exploitation led to condemnations of alchemy, English acts of parliament,
wow,
papal bulls across Christendom forbidding the practice under threat of severe penalties, sometimes even death.
And yet, Cockren notes that even Pope John XXII, who officially condemned alchemy, was rumored to practice it himself.
Yeah.
Enriching the papal treasury, maybe, through transmutation.
Right.
The irony.
It is quite a double standard, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So while some faced dire consequences, others were maybe secretly trying to get rich.
Right.
That's right.
So this kind of brings us to the 14th century and these Dutch adepts, the Isaacs Hollandus.
Yeah.
Cockren describes their writings as particularly detailed.
Yeah, so this father and son duo, known as the Isaacs Hollandus, left behind these really explicit descriptions of their operation. Works like De Triplici Ordine Auxiliaris et Lapidis Theoria and Mineralia Opera Su de Lapide Philosophico. Their accounts are actually so detailed that some scholars, like Professor John Reed, have actually expressed skepticism that maybe they were deliberately misleading those who weren't initiated.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So it's like this constant reminder that even seemingly clear alchemical texts can contain hidden meanings or intentional
misdirection.
Okay,
it's like you're navigating a maze, but the walls are constantly shifting.
Exactly.
Okay, now we arrive at, I think, one of the most iconic figures in alchemy, Nicholas Flamel.
Flamel,
This story has, all the elements of a classic quest.
Yeah.
A humble scribe who stumbles upon, a mysterious ancient book.
So the story of Nicholas Flamel, who lived from 1330 to 1418,
Okay.
is one of the most enduring and captivating tales in the history of alchemy.
Right.
Cockren recounts how Flamel acquired, for just 2 florins, this large gilded book.
Okay.
This book was unlike any he'd encountered, right?
Right.
Crafted from bark-like leaves,
Okay.
bound with brass, and covered in strange characters.
Wow.
That he initially thought were Greek.
So this wasn't just any ordinary book.
Yeah.
Every 7th page, instead of text,
Images.
illustrations. What kind of images are we talking about here?
According to Flamel, the book contained 21 leaves, right?
Okay.
Numbered. Grouped in sets of 7.
Okay.
On every 7th leaf, there were painted images, figures.
Okay.
The first depicted a virgin being devoured by serpents.
Okay.
The second, a serpent crucified on a cross.
Okay.
And then the final one showed a wilderness with fountains and serpents.
That's a lot to unpack.
Right.
Yeah. And the text, it was written by
Abraham the Jew.
Abraham the Jew.
Yeah.
What did this inscription reveal?
So the first leaf with writing had an inscription in golden letters. Abraham the Jew, prince, priest, Levite, astrologer, and philosopher.
Okay.
And it was addressed to the Jewish people dispersed throughout France.
Okay.
And then it included these stern curses against anyone who dared to read the book without being a priest or scribe. So it's clear, right, that he wanted to keep it within a select group.
Okay. Thanks.
And then on the second leaf, Abraham offered words of comfort to his people,
Okay.
urging them to shun vices, idolatry,
Right.
and patiently await the Messiah.
Okay.
But then the subsequent written leaves detailed the transmutation of metals in what Flamel describes as pretty straightforward language,
Really?
ostensibly to aid the Jewish people in paying tribute and other purposes that Flamel didn't disclose.
Okay. So if the instructions were so straightforward, why did Flamel struggle for so long to understand them?
So that's the thing.
Right.
While the practical instructions for metal transmutation seemed pretty direct,
Yeah.
Abraham had intentionally omitted any explanation of the prime agent,
Okay.
which he claimed to have depicted very carefully on the 4th and 5th leaves.
Okay.
He also explicitly said that a deep understanding of Jewish Kabbalah
Right.
and the Book of the Philosophers was necessary to grasp the meaning of the design.
Okay. So the practical and the esoteric all bound up together.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Flamel spends decades trying to work through these cryptic clues. 21 years, according to Cockren. That's a serious commitment.
Yes. So Flamel recounts those 21 years of unsuccessful attempts at deciphering the figures.
Right.
He eventually just gave up, despaired of ever understanding them on his own,
Right.
and resolved to seek out a knowledgeable Jewish priest in Spain
Right.
who might have the key.
Right.
So this led him to St. James,
Okay.
where he encountered a merchant in Lyon,
Okay.
who in turn introduced him to Master Candy.
Master Candies.
Yeah, who was a Jewish convert to Christianity
Okay.
and a scholar.
So this Master Candies, he held the key to this.
To this enigma.
Yeah.
Right. When Flamel showed Master Candies his copy of the figures, Candies was just overjoyed, and he immediately began deciphering, the first part of the book.
Oh, wow.
He revealed he'd heard a lot about this book, but he thought it was lost to time.
Really?
Flamel then continued his journey with Candies in his company. But unfortunately, on their way to Paris, Master Candies fell ill in Orleans
Oh, no.
and passed away after a week.
Oh, that's awful.
Before his untimely death, though, he had managed to interpret a good portion of the figures,
Wow.
even down to finer details.
What a sad twist of fate. So Flamel returned to Paris then with only this partial understanding.
Yeah, he did. And he attributes it to, divine grace, the intercession of the Virgin Mary and the saints.
Right.
That he eventually gained knowledge of the first matter, though not its initial preparation.
Okay.
And it took him another 3 years of study before he grasped this most challenging aspect.
Right. A testament to Flamel's persistence.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, the tale of Nicholas Flamel really exemplifies the dedication.
Yeah.
The almost mystical quest.
Yeah.
That alchemy represented for so many. Now let's turn to another figure, Basil Valentine.
Okay.
Cockren calls him the father of modern chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
But his story seems to be just as debated as Raymond Lully's.
Yeah, I mean, the historical records surrounding Basil Valentine, who's traditionally portrayed as a Benedictine monk,
Right.
is really shrouded in conflicting information. So while he's believed to have been born around 1394 and maybe served as a canon at the Priory of St. Peter at Erfurt,
Okay.
these details are hard to confirm.
Right.
But regardless of his true identity,
Right.
there's no doubt that Basil Valentine represents this pivotal point in the evolution of chemistry.
And his contributions weren't just, like, theoretical.
No.
Cockren lists some pretty tangible chemical discoveries attributed to him.
Absolutely. He's credited with the preparation of spirit of salt, which we know as hydrochloric acid, a method for extracting copper from its pyrites, the production of sulfo ether, and a process for obtaining brandy through the distillation of wine and beer. His writings documented a lot of valuable chemical facts and procedures, really.
So he's really taking a more, like, empirical approach to the study of matter?
Yeah.
But still, one foot firmly in the realm of practical chemistry.
Right.
But the other seems pretty rooted in these alchemical beliefs as well. Cockren mentions this conviction that perfect health and the perfection of metals were attainable goals.
Absolutely. He really did believe that achieving perfect health within the human body and the perfection of metallic substances were both attainable goals through alchemical means. He viewed the role of a physician as like a sacred trust. And he was very critical of the prevailing medical practices of his time. Lamenting the ignorance and complacency of doctors who just relied on, rote memorization rather than genuine understanding.
So kind of advocating for a more, like, hands-on, thoughtful approach to medicine.
Yeah, exactly.
But Cockren also points out this use of veiled language in Valentine's writings. What was that about?
So like many alchemists, Basil Valentine employed the symbolic, deliberately obscure language. Cockren kind of suggests that while the essential laboratory processes might seem omitted, the key to understanding them was hidden within these theological discussions.
Oh, interesting.
That he weaves throughout his texts.
So you'd have to, like, connect these seemingly disparate pieces of information to unlock the real knowledge?
Exactly. It was a way of safeguarding it from the uninitiated.
Writing in a secret code. Yeah, exactly.
And his most famous work, The Triumphal Chariot of Antimony, that seems to be the one that really carried the most weight.
Currus Triumphalis Antimonii, or The Triumphal Chariot of Antimony, is his most celebrated work. And it really was influential in establishing his reputation as a chemist. It provided this thorough investigation into the properties of antimony. And a lot of his findings were later rediscovered independently by modern chemists. The 1671 Amsterdam edition included a commentary by Theodorus Kerkringius, who claimed to have actually spoken with Valentine.
Really?
Which further kind of, adds to the mystique.
Yeah, definitely. And he leaves behind a considerable body of other work as well.
He does. He does.
And some of which were rumored to be hidden away. For future generations.
More enlightened generations.